Okay, you might turn open to Luke chapter 17 and have it ready there in a minute. And we'll be going to actually some other text, so mark that as a spot. I heard about two guys who were going through a field and a bull was in the field. And of course, realising that they were in trouble, began to ran, and as soon as they began to ran, the bull went after them. And one of the guys, as he's running, says to his friend John, he says, we're in for it. He says, can you pray a prayer for us? And he says, well, I've never done a public prayer in my life. And he said, well, you've got to put up a prayer for us because we're going to cop it by this bull. And so finally he says, I do the only prayer I know that my father used to say at the table, and that is this: O Lord, for what we're about to receive, make us truly thankful. Okay, all right, you may get the joke, you may not, I don't know. But anyway, the point is we're going to be talking about tonight is gratitude, okay? And I think we've all experienced ingratitude, have we not? You've been on the receiving end of ingratitude. It's a little bit like the boy that received an orange and his mother said to him, says, what do you say to the nice man? And he handed it back and he says, peel it. You know, ingratitude. One college student wrote about his girlfriend. She took my hand in sheltered nook. She took my sweets and my books. She took those gloves I brought for her. She took the words of love and care. She took my love rich and rare. She took my ring with tender smile. She took my time for quite a while. She took my kisses, made so shy. She took, I confess, my eye. She took whatever I would buy. Then she took the other guy. Ouch. We've all been on the receiving end of ingratitude. Turn to Colossians for a moment. Colossians, if you've got your Bibles. Get to Colossians chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2. Paul says over here in Colossians chapter 2, he starts out in verse 6. Colossians 2 and verse 6. As you therefore have received Christ the Lord, so walk in him. Now, some translations will have what? Got a different word there for walk. Live in him. Okay, so how do you live in him? He says, having firmly been rooted, number one, and now being built up in him, and there is another one, established in your faith, just as you are instructed. And then he says, the last one, overflowing, mine says, with gratitude. Do we have a different translation? Thankfulness. With thankfulness. Overflowing, what's the word before it? Overflowing. It's got that overflowing again. Yeah, that overflowing. Okay, so basically it's to abound in it. We're to abound in thankfulness. We're to abound in this gratitude. One translation describes it to excel still more in it. So it's something that bottom line, we've got to keep growing in, as we excel in this thing called gratitude. Look over with me in Colossians. We'll stay in the same book. Just go to Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. He says in verse 2, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. Any other translations?
Watchful and thankful.
Watchful and thankful. Okay, so it's this watchful, thankful attitude that we are to have as we're praying and as we are searching for the Lord. Look over in the book of Timothy. Just go to Timothy with me, to 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. Now we're talking about the last days here. We live in this last days era, okay? Last days began when, of course, Christ was ascended, and we live in that era till he comes again, the last days. And so he says here, but realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come, for men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, and mine says ungrateful, and unholy. Anyone got a different word than that? Ungrateful. Okay, it's this ungrateful spirit that often culture, when it moves away from God, it becomes more and more ungrateful. Now I want to say that that's a little bit of our culture, isn't it? You know, we've moved away from God even from 50 years ago. We're so much further from God. There's this ungratefulness when it comes to God. We're moving away from that. And when we take God out, this is what the end result is, of course. So now let's go over to Luke chapter 17, the text that we're going to be looking at tonight. Luke 17. Let's read Luke 17. Who's a willing reader from Luke 17, verse 11 through 19? Would someone read that? Okay, thank you. Nice and loud so we can all hear from there.
Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus travelled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan.
Very good, thank you. Now, if you went back to chapter 9 and go back to chapter 9, verse 51. I'm sorry to bounce you around here. But Jesus has been up, the first part of his ministry, spent a lot of time up in the northern part, up in Galilee. And then he makes a shift in verse 51, and it says he came about that when the days were approaching for his ascension, he resolutely set his face toward Jerusalem. I wonder what that looked like, eh? Having his face resolutely set toward Jerusalem. So he knew where he was going. He had a purpose in his walk because he was going to the cross. And so here he is, this section of scripture that we come to today, Jesus is heading towards Jerusalem. Now, you know, you and I are driving a car. If I'm saying I'm heading to Auckland, it's pretty much buckle in, we're going to get there, you know? But Jesus, when he heads to Jerusalem, there's this weaving that takes place because I think there's some providential encounters that he's going to have on that way to Jerusalem. If you read from verse 51 on, not 9:51, there's going to be some different circumstances and different people he's going to meet on the way. And this is one of the encounters that he has as he meets this crew of people that we've just read about on the way to Jerusalem. So it's kind of like God's providentially working here, in working him towards that goal and also to meet people. Now, when he comes into the town, do you notice here in verse 11, he says here, verse 12, verse 13, they raised up their voices saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Notice they raised their voices. Question, I'll open this up a little bit tonight. Why they? Why not one?
To hear them?
You got it, you get onto it, so that he could hear them. Why? Well, let me ask, yeah. So
they lived together. I mean, they were a colony of men that they had to stay together outside of the town.
okay, they had to stay together outside the town, but the point, I think you're right, you're on the edge of it. Bottom line is, when you have leprosy, you can't raise your voice. It's a squeak. So for them to raise their voice, to get attention, one man couldn't do it. All had to do it. They had to do it in unison to get the attention of Jesus, because it would be just a little squeak from the corner. So it's a pretty tough environment, a pretty tough situation. So here they are in unison because their bronchial tubes have all tightened up. They're basically shriveled up. And so together they would make this call. So here they are. We see the position of all these guys. Let's just get down to where we've got the position of all these guys, all right? They're in a pretty bad state. So I want to notice some things here. And that's, first of all, the physical aspect of leprosy. Leprosy began with basically a white sort of spottiness on the body. Normally began with the face. And it proceeded then to become little nodules. And then those nodules become more spread out, moving from the face to the rest of the body. They would then become pussy. And then they would go from pussy to becoming kind of infected, and then they would stink. They say that leprosy, you could smell a leper before you saw one. So bottom line is, socially, this would be a real problem, wouldn't it? But you can imagine the feeling that you're suddenly seeing this stuff break out on you. There's no hope for you because it's no return. And you're starting to see this happen over your body. It's a pretty discouraging. You'd have this foul discharge that's taking place. Then it starts to work on your central nerve system. So pain would start to take place. Then you'd get your muscles will waste away. The tendons would contract, so your hands would become like claws. Your toes will start to wither up. Then you start to lose parts of your body. You'd lose your ear. Your eyelids, they start to get deformed. Everything drops out. Things drop off. So it's a death. They said it's a death by inches. So it's a terrible way to die, isn't it? And then eventually you would basically go into a coma, and normally you'd die in this colony or out in the field somewhere. My father had a brother, Uncle Dick. Uncle Dick went to the Second World War. And Uncle Dick was something happened in the Second World War where he lost his mind. But his parents decided they'd buy him a little bit of land in the country in the Waihi, which is way south of here, about 7-8 hours from here. And what happened was he became a recluse. I got a call from my dad. He said, Chris, would you do the funeral for Uncle Dick? I never have met Uncle Dick. No one could go onto his property. He'd hold a shotgun and basically keep everybody off, including his own father and brother at times. But he just said, listen, can you come down with me and we're going to go and do this, what we've got to do. So I said I did, sure. So we drove down the road and there was this gorse all over the place. This farm had gone to rack and ruin. We walked up this little narrow track and came up to this little huts where Uncle Dick lived. And I can remember my dad just being sort of horrified by this existence. And then finally I walked over, and there on the ground is the patch where Uncle Dick had died. It was like a carcass. If you've been a sheep farmer, you see a sheep dies, it just leaves a sort of a dead patch where everything, their body had decomposed. My dad broke down because he realised Uncle Dick kind of died alone. He died a terrible death. And when I was writing this lesson, that really typifies the way these guys died. It wasn't in a nice linen with nice bed sheets and a comfortable hospice somewhere, which some of us will probably die in, a nice hospice. You know what I mean? Reality. It's not going to be in that kind of setting. It's going to be in a setting where these guys die is in a field somewhere. So it's a terrible way to die, isn't it? Just painting the picture here. Okay, so that was the physical aspect of it. We can talk a lot more on that, but you're getting the picture. Here's the other aspect. There's the social banishment. The social banishment was, notice it says verse 12, they stood afar. If we went back to Leviticus, and we probably won't spend time there, but bottom line is they were told to live outside the camp, outside. They were to live on this little colony, away from people. When I went to a leopard colony up in Asia, they don't have them in the public area. They have them way in the country, away from people. And this was pretty much it. You had to keep, they said there was a distance of 16 feet that you had to keep from a leper. And the leper, of course, at the moment you came close, you would have to call out as loud as you could squeak it out, unclean, unclean. So they wouldn't come too close to you because it was very contagious at that point. So it was socially a very difficult disease. Now you could imagine when you got this disease, you were removed from your family. You were removed from your children. You couldn't hug your kids. You couldn't hug your wife. There was none of that stuff that went on. You couldn't go into the temple that you had been raised around in this local synagogue. That was removed from you. So your worship to God was cut short, in a sense. You couldn't go into the marketplace and buy food. They would have to bring them out and drop the food off, and then you'd come and collect it and take it away to your little colony. Pretty tough existence. And you could yell, if you had conversations, your family would have to sit a distance away, and you'd have to sit like over here and yell to them and talk to them from a distance. So it was no touch. It was basically all you could do is raise a bit of a squeak, and that's the way you discuss things with them. So it's pretty tough. But here comes Jesus. He comes into this environment, and I've got down here, what I'm so grateful for here is that here is the law that says man cannot go and Jesus goes. Where the law declares off limits, Jesus barges in. Where the law passes on the other side, Jesus makes a point of contact. And so here is the situation where, of course, Jesus moves into this particular setting here. And I think this, the reason Jesus has gone this way, he's going to show us something that basically there's nobody who's too far from Jesus. Doesn't matter how sinful we think we are, God loves even those people from a distance. Even those people who live in a distance, he wants to draw them close to him. And that's what we must understand. And I think we've all at times probably felt some shame or distance from people. C.S. Lewis said that God is the hound of heaven. You know, what's he is? The hound of heaven? Someone he's always seeking us out. He's always in pursuit of us. He's always in this relationship with us. He's the hound of heaven, you know. And so, you know, as he, of course, he moves in close here. Now, we've got to notice something here about that. We see first of all, we saw them coming together, but notice the prayer of all here. One of the first things I think we have to accept here, and that's in our walk, is that they admitted their helplessness. They sensed their need. And, you know, think about through the scriptures, think about times when you notice that people who come to God have to be willing to accept that they are helpless, that there is a need in their life. Before we come to where we are, we have to be willing to say, hey, I'm in a spot here. I looking back in my Christian life, and my first search for God was because basically I realised there was something missing in my life. I had a business in Hamilton. It was a flourishing business. It was the top third takeaway type restaurant in Hamilton at the time in turnover. And we were making lots of money. For a 21-year-old, we were making lots of money. But there was something in us that was missing, and I knew it. And I had to admit that there was something. It took me travelling around the world to 33 countries to realise there was something missing. But there was something missing. And I think there has to be in all of us this vacuum that we feel, this hole in us. And to realise that we have a desperate need. Look over in Psalm with me. Look at Psalm 32. Psalm 32. What was David's, you know, what was David's plight for a while there? If you remember when he sinned with Bathsheba, what was David's problem for a while? Can you remember it? He tried to hide it. He didn't want to come out with it, did he? You know, didn't want to admit it. And, you know, it was later on that we find that in this psalm, finally it was, most say it was a year later that David actually began to admit it. And Psalm 32 in verse 3 here, he says, I kept silent about my sin. My body wasted away, verse 32, verse 3, my groaning all day long. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me, my vitality was drained away as with a fervor heat of the sun. And then he says, I acknowledge my sin to thee, and my iniquity I did not hide. And I said, I will disclose and confess my transgressions to the Lord, and thou didst forgive the guilt of my sin. Now, when David did that, there was this wonderful release in David's life, you know. And I think that's it with us. When we start to admit along the way our struggles, our sin, there's something freeing about that. Let me ask you something. Do you have people? Do you have individuals that you share your struggles with? It's really important to, isn't it? You know, to be able to get together with other guys or girls get together and share. There's times that we need that. Well, what's the benefit of that for you? Let me open that up. What is the benefit for that?
You don't feel alone.
Okay, you don't feel alone in it. What else?
So you finally wised up, because if it conquers you once, you have to bring in reinforcements. So really could use a sidekick
Yes.
to help you out.
Yes. So it's a reinforcement to help you get through and go beyond it in a lot of ways. Yep. Okay.
Hold you accountable to someone.
Okay. So there's accountability here. That this brother, I'm just not alone with it. It's helping me process this and work through it and walk me through it, because if I'm struggling with it, I need someone to hold me accountable to that.
Well, I mean, I think that like it's good to talk to somebody about, you know, like if I have a struggle that's similar to somebody else's, it's good to kind of talk to each other about it. But I don't think that it's good for those two people to try to help lift each other out, because it'd be like blind leading blind. I think that the kind of person that should be helping you out is somebody that doesn't necessarily struggle with it, or you know, possibly have somebody that's also there with you all as you
Right.
talk about it. That, you know, kind of like AA meetings. There's always
Right.
somebody there that doesn't struggle with alcohol.
Right.
That can help all of them be like a mediator between all of them, saying, you know why you're here and all this stuff. If you just had a ton of people usually that were just struggling with something, it would kind of
It's a bit of a
it
pooling.
becomes more of something where you tell each other just so you kind of feel better about it. Like,
Mhm.
I told somebody, but then I'm gonna go do it anyway.
Right.
It becomes
Right.
just a-
Yep. And so you stay on that level. Whereas someone who's maybe gone through it and passed on, yep. Okay.
Give you steps.
Gives you steps to help you towards it. Okay.
But it does heal you by telling somebody.
Sure.
What type of this burden to you.
Well, I think it's the first steps, isn't it? You know.
Right, the first steps.
Yeah. What else? Anything else in this idea of the importance of admitting our helplessness?
I think it's like holding it in can be like a rot, you know? It's like it's rotting inside you, and so you get it out, and it helps that cleansing. Right?
Yes.
And it makes it real in a way, like something that actually truly has to be acknowledged and dealt with, rather than as long as you're hiding it or think you're hiding it.
Yes.
You're not hiding it.
Yes.
Well, you sort of you feel like you can ignore it.
Yep.
But once you say it out, like truly say it to somebody, it makes it real, like it
Yep.
probably has to be.
Yep. And you can see it more visually that way, can't you? Let's put it out more visually. This is a problem I've got. Yep. Anybody else? Why admit it?
I think sometimes it can make you accept that there is a problem.
Yep.
You might
Okay.
be struggling with something and not actually understanding the problem at its heart
Yep.
until you talk to someone about it.
Yep.
Then you might find the nature of the problem shifts,
Yes.
and that what's actually getting you down isn't so much the problem,
Mhm.
but a symptom of the problem.
Yep.
Talking about it gets you to the core.
Right. So they're taking you deeper with it as you talk through it. Yep.
Yeah, so understanding and acceptance
Yeah.
of what it actually is.
Okay. Yep. It's good. Okay. So I think this, for these guys, I mean, basically there's admittance here that we've got a problem. These guys here in this text, obviously we have a problem. We all have it together. What's interesting here is that there's Samaritan, there's Gentile and Jew together. That's a real odd setting, isn't it? Well, you don't normally put them together, but here they are together in this setting, and they are in this because they have a commonality. They have this common problem. They all have leprosy. Another thing here that's good is they acted on the faith that they had. Now, what do we mean by that? I can explain, but what do we mean by that? They acted on the faith that they had. Notice what he said to them. What did he say to them?
He said, go to the priests.
Go to the priest.
So they took him, they was like, right, okay, we believe what Jesus says, so we're going to do as we're told.
Yeah.
They had that faith,
Yeah. This is probably the first encounter they had with them, and this is this first step of faith. It was, and probably it's not a saving faith here, but it's just an action faith. And that's really all of us. Sometimes our faith is at this level, and people's faith is at that level, but they are to obey at that level. That's the thing. That's what we're trying to get people at. Obey at the level that you are at. And as it grows, it will become maybe down the line and even a saving faith. So we've got to take people where they're at. Jesus right now is requiring one little simple step: go to the priest. If they said, "Oh no, I'm not going to go to the priest," do you know what I mean? Well, hey, they haven't got that faith to even do that. So I think it's important that we start somewhere with people. Start here. He's requiring them to start here and start heading towards the priest. In the book of Hebrews, of course, Abraham. You remember Abraham in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. You know, and Abraham, when he was called, was really in a process of faith. He was called from the Ur of Chaldees. He would come out of paganism, if you read back there, you know, in Acts chapter 7. There's a lot of history here, but God told him, now go. Where does he go to? How far does he get? So he really goes up the road to Haran, up the north, because Haran was of the same culture as Ur. The same gods, everything. So really, that step was a little step of faith, but it wasn't a major step of faith. And then if you remember in Genesis 11, what does he do then? Sorry?
God asked him again.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. This is not it. Dad dies, remember, because before Dad was leading the way, and it was meant to be Abraham leading the way. But God keeps working with him. Even that little bit of faith it took him to get up to Ur. Dad dies, and God said, now come on, leave your relative, leave all this, I want you to go. And so finally, he leaves Ur and comes down to the promised land. But it's all this gradual step of faith. And God takes us where we're at and moves us forward, you know? I'm grateful for that, because I'll be honest with it, you know, I'm in this process of growing my faith. I'm not there yet, nor are you. And along the line, God's going to test me and say, now it's time to leave this, it's time to do this. Now, am I going to be obedient at that point, you know? And so, they proceed, of course. And now we're going to notice here, I want you to notice there's a twist, though. Because really, you have just the praise of one, don't you? What happens here in the story? What changes?
They all asked for his help, and only one went back to thank him.
Okay. They've all asked for the physical help, but only one here does a turnabout and comes back to him. Why do you think that was the case? Why the one? What's happened in him?
All the others probably ran off to do all the stuff that they had been missing for so long, but he really got it. Like he really realized how big of a deal it was. It was a God thing.
Okay. I think he's realizing on that as he's going, suddenly he realizes who's this person who's done this? That he must be God. He must be something greater than, you know, and he's done something, he's doing some thinking, this guy. And remember, he's got what is he? What's his background? He's a Samaritan. He's got no heritage at all that way, as far as, you know, the Jewish heritage. But he's doing some thinking as he's going, and suddenly he switches and says, okay, he must be God, you know? And what does he do? He bows down. That's an acknowledgement that he is God, you know. And so there's a change that takes place here in this man's heart. I like what one guy, Kaufman, Bert Kaufman, he says this, and he kind of does it tongue in cheek. I like it. He says, one way to see if the cure was real, one way to see if it would last. One said he would see Jesus later. One decided he'd never had leprosy. One said he would have gotten well anyway. One gave glory to the priest. I like that one. One said, oh well, Jesus didn't really do it anyway. One said just any rabbi could have done it. One said, I was already much improved anyway, you know. Now, tongue in cheek, okay? But you get the picture, don't you, you know. But this one guy makes a turn. And he realizes who this Jesus really is. And he's willing to bow down and worship him. So what do we get from this? There's a couple of things that I want to put out to you and leave it at this, all right? Here's the first one that I think is really important that we get. Are we so wrapped up in the blessing that we forget the blessor? Now, I know that there's no such word as blessor, okay, but I'm throwing it in here, right? Extending the English language a little bit, of the blessing. Can we do that? And how do we do it?
I think it's very easy to do that. Very easy. Like, God gives us everything, even our breath every second that we breathe. And it's one of those things that we can very easily put out of our mind. And, it's just one of those things that I'm entitled to, you know?
Right,
And it
right.
isn't. It's one of those things that He's blessed us with. And,
Right.
and we don't thank Him enough
For it.
even the little.
Even the little.
things.
Very true. Very true. Any other thoughts on that?
I think people get so wrapped up in what they can get that they forget to look at what they can give, and only in coming to know the blessor of the blessing can you truly learn to give.
Right.
People stop at the getting part.
Right,
and,
right.
And that's sort of, I don't know what mentality necessarily, but it is a very self-oriented, self-surviving. I mean, a lot of people who do just have to survive in the world, they rarely think beyond the what do I do once I've received, but only in getting to know the blesser, coming back and acknowledging him and
Right.
seeing him face to face, could you truly ever learn to give.
Right. True.
It's also in some ways you can get caught up in what preceded the blessing. Like, I finally went and read my Bible, or I
Yes.
finally prayed, or I actually prayed for a whole hour, or I went and talked to the pastor, or I went and did this. You kind of get caught up in what preceded it, and you kind
Right.
of focus on some method that you created or something.
Right.
some kind of
Right.
faithfulness that has twisted itself to put the focus on you and what you did, or
Yes.
something along those lines.
Yes.
So it can almost, knowing my personality, I like to work within systems. You know, this plus this plus this plus this
Yeah.
equals this,
Yeah.
boom, every time.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Right.
And so it would be easy for me to do that just because I would think, oh, well, I did these certain things. And that
Therefore, this is the outcome.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think that we're wrapped up in our life, which is like a blessing, because we're really, gifted,
Yes.
society,
Yes.
third world countries,
Yes.
where our life would be a huge blessing to have everything that we have. And
That's right.
a lot of times we take for granted everything that we are blessed with on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
Like having heater and air conditioning.
Right.
And
Right.
water and food every, meal all the time, and tea and
Right. Right.
and so when you get a little bit more of the extreme gifts, things that even we would consider like, better.
Yes.
It's still kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
But it's when something bad happens that we realize, oh, we are blessed.
Mm.
When in third world countries they live all the time
Like
in
that.
what you would
Yeah.
call bad
Right.
conditions. And when they
Right.
get the little things, it's like, oh, I'm blessed for this.
Yes.
And they're even thankful for,
Yes.
they could be dying, but
Yeah.
they're still like
Yeah.
really thankful. And I think
That's
a lot of
right.
times we're just conditioned to just think that, oh, we have this, or we deserve this, or
Right.
this is the norm when it's not. And
That's right.
I think we do get wrapped up in
Yeah.
the blessings.
That's right. Well, we live in the top 3% of the world. The other 97 don't live at our standard. And I think, in our culture right now, they say 7 to 10% worship on a Sunday. Now, depending what statistics you see, but 7 to 10% in our culture. The other 10%, the other 90% don't acknowledge God. Or if they do not want to show gratitude to Him. We're the 10%. But the other 90% don't, Now, they may in their lives at different times naturally, but the point is, I think we need to make sure that we are always thankful for what God is giving us on this journey, Someone said we can be like old old pigs that root around the acorn tree on the ground and never look up to acknowledge the tree that's producing the acorns. The acorns are dropping down on us all the time, and yet we're failing to acknowledge the acorns or where they're coming from, you know. And I think sometimes that can happen. 1 Thessalonians, turn over there for a moment. 1 Thessalonians. I think it's really important that we learn to verbalize our thanks. And I don't just mean to God, I mean to each other as well. That we don't take each other for granted, that we are thankful people and we learn to appreciate each other and acknowledge that, become verbal with it. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 18 says this, "In everything give thanks." He says, "For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. In everything give thanks." Now, you can feel thankful. A lot of us may feel thankful, but he's not saying just feel it. He's saying what? Express it. Express it. Give it. Because it's so much more richer. Look over in the book of Hebrews. What does he say in Hebrews here? Hebrews chapter 13. A few more chapters, a few more books on. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 15. He says in verse 15, "Through him then let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God." That is what? The fruit of the lips. In other words, it isn't just thought, it is to be expressed. It's the fruit of the lips to God. It's that expression of gratitude. I can see, something in Elijah that I appreciated, but I can think it. But here's the problem. If I don't express it, he's not going to gain the blessing from that. And I think as a group of Christians, as we grow, we must be learning to appreciating each other, to acknowledge the gifts that God has given each other, to say thank you, to each other as well as to God. So it's vertical as well as horizontal as we do this. And what happens? We get blessed. It encourages us. It spurs us on. I'm here and I'm in ministry for I've been coming up nearly 32 years, 31 years. And I look back and all the way through, there's been these ingredients of people, these individuals that have encouraged me and spoken to me and it kept me going. But if I hadn't had that, I don't know where I'd be. But they have verbalized it, and I think that's what we need to do with each other. It doesn't matter where we sit, we need to be verbalizing. Osmosis don't work, you know what I mean? Just thinking it and hoping you're going to get it doesn't work. We need to make sure that we're verbalizing it, that we're expressing it. Now, how do we do that? What are ways we can do that? We can
Verbally to their faces.
To their faces, okay. What are other ways we can do that?
Send them a letter.
Send them a card, a special thank you. Yeah,
You do something special for them.
doing something special for them, honouring them in that way. Yeah. Have you had it? Has someone done anything to you guys? Yeah. Okay. Good. And so it's important we do this, as a group, because people are going to be drawn to that. They don't, we've got to be different than the world. We've got to act differently, behave differently, and treat people differently. So it's really important that we give thanks in all circumstances and learn to appreciate God, of course, and of course each other. Here's another thing that I put down here. We'll get to it. Here you are. Are you seeking the blessing from God or are you seeking God? See the difference here? See, there's two stories in the story. The first story is basically a story of healing. What's the second story in the story? Did you catch it? There is a discovery in it. But there's something else in this, deeper than that.
Belief, faith.
There is a faith in here. But look what he says down to, go back into that text. Let's get back there. Look what he says to him he says, you've been healed. He says, come down to verse 19. And he said to him, arise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. Different translations come out and say it this way. Your faith has made you whole. Another translation, your faith has saved your soul. So what happened in this journey, of course, is possibly when he comes back, the other's got a physical healing, he's getting a spiritual healing. In other words, they are all going to die at some point. And he's going to live.
Yep.
He got the serendipity. That's the serendipity in the story. When this guy came back and acknowledged, he got something far more richer than the other guys ever got. They're all going to die. This guy's going to die, but the difference with him is he's going on to something into eternity. You know? The word there is soza. It's literally the word salvation, or literally the word is here to be delivered. God has delivered him, not just from this peril of the physical, but from the peril of the eternal, you know.
And I don't think that it's like, you know, it's not just like the sorry, or it's not just like the thank you.
Yes.
It's the one, we actually talked about this in one of my classes, this verse, and it was, the topic of our class was talking about, you know, it's like, can some Bible scriptures that we talk about, you know, mean more than what, you know, you just assume that it means. Like if you're telling kids this story, you'd say, okay, to be thankful. But it's deeper. And he was talking, my professor was talking about the history of the word thank you. And back when, I guess through his research, he was saying back when this story was told, you know, all the Gospels were meant to be read straight through at one setting without stopping. And so people would stand up in front and just read it. So when you read through that book of Luke, when it talks about when they come back, when you said thank you back in that time, it was like if you gave me a gift and I said thank you, that meant that I was cutting off. It was like, I'm not going to give anything back to you. I'm just saying thanks. You're just getting a verbal response and leaving. Usually when people gave something, if I gave something to you, you wouldn't say anything to me. You would receive it, go on with your way, but later on, you would do something for me. And you would keep this relationship of just understanding that I'm going to give you something, you give me something. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. But once one of us says thank you, it's done. And so it's a bad thing usually to say thank you back in that time. So when the person would have been reading this book and they said, you know, one person came back and said thank you, and he was a Samaritan, everybody would be like, oh, see, it's a Samaritan. Of course he would say thank you, end it. Well, there's only two cases in the time where thank you is appropriate. One, if somebody did something so great you could never repay them. Or two, if the person was a king. And so the Samaritan was basically acknowledging that Jesus was high up. He was his faith. He had this faith that he was of God, that he was greater than himself. Unlike everybody else, it's probably like, oh, he's just a man. He did something for me. I can repay him later. The Samaritan came back saying, like, you know, you're above me. You know, that's the reason Jesus might have responded with, your faith has healed you. You know, you are saved because you truly believe that I am
who I am.
You know, the king.
Right.
I am who I am. And that was kind of that acknowledging factor when you know, people heard that, they would have been like, oh, okay, you know, I get it. That he probably did. You know, he was the king. You know, he was above. That's the reason he said thank you. So it was kind of like, no, the Samaritan got it. He wasn't saying thank you. And so that was kind of how that ties in. It was that belief. It wasn't just the words. It was the substance behind it. Because so many times we say, oh, we're Christians, but we don't act like it. So.
And I think there's a body language here too, isn't there? I mean, he bowed down. There's a whole acknowledgement of this. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. And here's the thing what I want to say in summary. Don't get so preoccupied with the lesser gifts that you miss the greatest gift of all, okay? And sometimes we can do that. We can sort of miss the greatest gift that we have, and that is that we have life. That God has given us the greatest thing of all, you know. And sometimes we can get caught up with the material things of this world, but miss the greatest, that we have Jesus.